And I'm going to ask Sister Liz, could you please pray for us as we start this hour together?
Our dear righteous and heavenly Father, as we have gathered for the second class tonight, we thank you for giving Pastor wisdom, understanding, Lord, that he will be able to teach the words that you have directed him to teach us. Open our eyes, our ears, and our hearts to accept all of this. We ask all of this in Jesus Christ's name. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Okay, so we're really going to be sticking with our book pretty good here and kind of outlining it and then trying to look at some scriptures related to it. So this is just still overview. The first 3 chapters really are more of an overview. And then we will be getting like really more into the specific geography beginning in Genesis and working right through Genesis. And we're going to go, Lord willing, up to about King Saul. But we will be looking at a number of scriptures and to just try to bring out the light that understanding of biblical geography can give to us. Okay? So as we begin tonight, this is chapter 2. You can keep I would open up your book to chapter 2. That's on page 12. And a number of people will be reading. And then the notes are really going to be taken from the book as well. So you see the first page of this chapter, that's page 12, the 3rd line down. It says we focus on Palestine, the geographical epicenter of our faith. So that's the blank there. I got that blank from there. That epicenter, the very epicenter of our faith is focused right in on Israel, the center of the world. And he goes on and he talks about in this section here how few areas on earth are comparable in size and yet have such great geographic diversity as Palestine does. And we talked about last week about the size of New Jersey, 150 by about 70 miles. And yet it has fertile plains, it has mountains, it has ranges, plateaus. It has the lowest place of sea level on earth, and that's kind of well known, at the Dead Sea. So this kind of gives you a little chart of the geographic change of Israel from the coastal plain, and we'll be looking at to the Shephelah, which is about 1,300 foot elevation, up to Jerusalem, which is 2,500 foot, and then there's a wilderness all the way down to the Dead Sea, the lowest place on earth as far as the lowest sea level, from my understanding. So it's a very diverse geographic place. So these features make it difficult, have made it difficult throughout history to unite the country. And that's why, like when Israel attacked it, there were 31 different city-states that had to be conquered by Joshua and the armies of Israel. So city-states, that's letter C. So the land where you go to possess it is a land of hills and valleys, and drinketh, it should say there, drinketh water of the rain of heaven, about 24 inches per year. So some of the names for the Holy Land, and Micah brought out a great point last week, and I really appreciate that you did that. The word Palestine, and that's number 1 there, 2 names for the Holy Land, and it's often called Palestine, and that's derived from the Philistines who inhabited the southern coastland. In other words, the name of a part of the country came to be applied to the whole of the country. And another name, of course, is Canaan, for the Canaanites were there before the Israelites. But still, that's kind of interesting that we're more naming the name for a certain people that live there, the Philistines, and then we call it Palestine, or we call it the Canaanites. They haven't lived there from when Joshua basically went in and God told him to exterminate them. So it's probably best to be called the Promised Land, or Judah, or Israel. So you might want to put that in your notes. And I appreciate Micah, you saying that last week. Micah, did you want to add to that? The term Palestine does derive from the Philistines. Is that your understanding?
Yes, it derives from the Philistines. So the area where the Philistines were, so I mean, my understanding on the map that you're showing right there, the coastal
That's the
plain,
coastal plain. Yeah,
that's where the Philistines were. So it wasn't the whole country, it was just a small section of it.
right.
But the Emperor Hadrian in 132 AD, AD 132, he basically, as an insult and offense to the Jewish people, renamed the whole area Palestine. So the book, uses it. Plenty of people use that word. But as I read it, I think to myself, the entire time that the Bible was written, they didn't use that word to describe that area of land. So no one who lived in Bible times would have understood that land to be called Palestine. But even more than that, it's an insult to the Jewish people. So for me, I always cringe a little bit when I read the word Palestine.
Yeah. So you know what? You brought conviction to me too. You got conviction to my heart because when I looked at this section of the notes that I said, look at that, two names, Palestine and Canaan, and really it's the promised land and it's Israel, and it's true. Why did so like you said, Hadrian did that to really kind of shame the Jewish people or to kind of mock them or in some kind of way, I guess. But why not call it Judah after the name of the main tribe that returned from captivity or Israel? But anyway, okay.
Pastor, so is Palestine the current situation in Gaza? Is that Gaza is where Palestine is? Because it is near that coast area. Am I correct or am
Now,
I
Gaza
wrong?
would be would be ancient Palestine.
Ah,
Absolutely.
got it.
Yeah, that same area.
There lies the geographical challenges right now, and that we're dealing with.
Yeah, yeah, it hasn't gone away.
Yep.
And and the word Canaan, by the way, is really derived from the word of being a buyer, a seller, a merchant. And the Canaanites were merchants. And because again, as we said, this was a land bridge of of people who connected from all over the world, and so there was a lot of travel. There were a lot of buyers and sellers. I mean, just think of the days of Joseph when he was sold into slavery by the Midianite merchantmen who were traveling through, and so that was very common. And so the word Canaanite actually means merchant, and yeah. Okay, so now what we want to do though is look at these natural regions of this promised land. And the four main regions, north and south, you see them here, and you can jot them on in your notes, page 8 and 9. The coastal plain, then the hill country, and then the Jordan Rift Valley, or and then the Trans-Jordan Plateau, or the Eastern Plateau. There's two names for that. And if you look in your map on page 13, try to locate those areas as well on page 13. You see the coastal plain, and it goes all the way up the coast. And we talked about the major international road, the Way of the Sea, that went along that route and then cut across the Valley of Jezreel and then went east from there. Then you see the Western Mountains, or that would be the hill country, the Western Mountains, and that would go through with Jerusalem as one of the mountain peaks of that area. And then the Jordan Rift Valley, that would be the Arabah, the Jordan Rift, and that's right between the Dead Sea going up to the Sea of Galilee. And then east of that, you see the Eastern Plateau is what our book calls it, or the Transjordan Plateau is what this map refers to it as, okay? So those are the four main north-south regions. Okay, you got all that? Okay, so the coastal plain. Let's talk about the coastal plain. I just have a couple of pictures here. This is the coastal plain. So if you look on page 9 in your notes, that would be the coastal plain. This extends from Tyre in the north, and if you could locate that on your map, if you could kind of be interactive here. And Jesus went to Tyre and Sidon. Remember, he went to try to be hid, but that's where he met a woman who was like pounding on the door, and it says he could not be hid, and the disciples even told her to go away. But she had a great need. So Jesus went up to Tyre and Sidon. That was the area of Jezebel. That's where Elijah was hiding and met that woman of Sidon, the woman there up in Sidon, I believe. So, and it goes all the way down. And then if you look at, you see Mount Carmel, and of course, a very famous miracle at Mount Carmel where Elijah called down fire from heaven. And if you look down below that, you see Caesarea. That was the main city named after Caesar. And it really became the Roman capital of Israel. That's where Paul was tried in the book of Acts by Agrippa and Festus. His civil trial was held at Caesarea. And then if you go down, you see Joppa. Peter did a miracle in Joppa. And if you go down even further, you see the plain of the Philistia, the Philistines, Gaza. That's where Goliath was from. I'm sorry, Gath. He was from Gath, which was another Philistine city, Gath. But these are the Philistine cities: Gezer, Ekron, Gath, Ashdod, Ashkelon. So, and that's where the Gaza Strip is, as you mentioned earlier. So that's the coastal plain.
Pastor, also, I realized how many towns in America is named after geography from the Bible.
Oh, yeah.
You know, like Canaan, New Canaan, Connecticut. I mean, you know, all now it's beginning to come to me. A lot of these towns actually got their names from the Bible.
Yeah. My grandfather lived in Babylon.
Oh,
Okay, so that's a little bit of the coastal plain. Then we have the Jezreel Valley. Now, if you look in your map again on page 7, if you could locate that, the Jezreel Valley, and it's right to the north. If you find Mount Carmel on the shoreline, Mount Carmel, and then Jezreel Valley is just kind of like to the north of that, and it kind of goes south as it goes east. It kind of goes southeast toward Bethshan. So the Jezreel Valley was a very important trade route, and trade routes radiated throughout the Jezreel Valley in all directions. So this was a very strategic, important area because of its trading and the road, of course, that passed through it. So it's kind of an interesting, you can almost see here too, there's like an arrow. This is the Jezreel Valley here. It's like arrow shaped. See here. Yeah, it's arrow shaped valley. And so here's Mount Carmel here. And then the Jezreel Valley. So it was a hub and intersection of land routes. It was the easiest place to cross east to west in Israel. It means God sows, Jezreel. It's referred to in the book of Hosea. And the International Coastal Highway entered Jezreel at Megiddo. So if you look again on your map, if you could find Megiddo, and that's where the Battle of Armageddon. So it's a plain, it's a valley, and it's a flat area as well. It's a natural, they say it's a natural battlefield. And there are a number of battles in the Bible that took place there, as well as there will be future battles fought there. But Megiddo is where the International Coastal Highway passed through. And so again, because of the mountains in the central part of Israel, this made it a natural crossing place to get over to the east rather than to cross over the mountains to go through the valley, flatter and less mountainous. So some of the important people where this is referenced is Naboth. He's called Naboth the Jezreelitess. And what did Naboth have that was desirable? Who wanted it?
His garden.
Yeah, and who wanted it?
Ahab.
Ahab. Because it was a strategic location. For Ahab to get that spot, it would help him in his trading. It would give him, what do they say? Location is everything. It would give him more visibility, perhaps to traders, and more power, more money. So, of course, Ahab wanted the property of Naboth and then connived and killed for it. Okay, so Vinicius, if you could go to Judges, and this is the battle between Deborah and Barak and the Canaanite Sisera. And it kind of has an interesting little thing here. It's just a little thing, but it just shows that the Bible is accurate when it talks about its geologic and geographic realities that were there. So in Judges chapter 5, Venetius, could you please read for us verse 21?
21, yeah. The river of Kishon swept them away, that ancient river, the river Kishon. O my soul, thou hast trodden down strength.
Okay, so the writer mentions the river Kishon. Now, is there such a river? And if there is such a river, would it have the power to defeat an army? And the answer to both questions is yes. And so our book brings this out. And I believe, Jessica, I've asked you to read, if you go to page 16, if you look at page 16, on the left-hand side of the page, under the Jezreel Valley section there, and the last paragraph that begins fertile soil and abundant water supplies. And Jessica, James, if you could please read that.
Fertile soil and abundant water supplies made the valley agriculturally productive, especially for barley and wheat crops. Numerous springs in the valley fed two small streams flowing to the east and west. The Kishon drained the western Jezreel, while Harod Jalud emptied to the east. This abundance of water created marshes at times. Heavy rains occasionally caused these streams to flood, as described in Deborah's victory over the Canaanites, recorded in Judges 4 and 5.
Okay. And so there was an abundance of water, and they're often flooded. And if you go ahead, look at page 26. Look at page 26 in your textbook. And here it talks about the different climate patterns of the land. And if you look if you could find that Mount Carmel, that's where there's a little jut out there. And right here it says Haifa, and you'll see the Kishon River. You'll see the Kishon River right there. And you'll see that it's in a greenish area of the map. And this map is talking about the average annual rainfall. And so that part of Israel, there's more rainfall in that one part of Israel than in most of the other parts. And so God used that river to wash away the enemies of Deborah and Barak. So again, it just shows how precise the Bible is and how God is sovereign over these things. So that's where Bible geography can help us. I think it strengthens our faith in the authority and the truthfulness of the Bible. Okay, so we see Deborah and Barak gathered an army to fight the Canaanites there at Mount Tabor, and it was the Kishon River that swept them away. And you might want to jot that verse down. I didn't have that verse anywhere, but it's Judges chapter 5, verse 21. Okay, so then we come, so this is the Jezreel Valley, and I just have a couple other pictures here. This is for the Jezreel Valley. There's no new blanks here, but this kind of shows you how the valley is kind of like arrow-shaped, and this shows you the hill country. So here would be the International Coastal Highway, And then this would be a natural place for them to cross, going east and then down into the Fertile Crescent. We talked about that last week. So here's another view of the Jezreel Valley and of Megiddo. Here's the valley of Armageddon. And then here's some other places. These places are mentioned in the Bible: Mount Tabor, Hill of Moreh. And we'll look at some of these places as we go through the class. This is the Jezreel Valley from Mount Carmel. Has anyone ever been to the top of Mount Carmel? Has anybody been there?
I have.
Is it a popular place for people to go?
It is. They have a chapel. It's not like a church, but they have like a chapel on a building with pictures of Isaiah. They have somewhere where you can stand and look over the valley. And it's dedicated to the event there where Elijah was, battling the prophets of Baal. Yeah. Mhm. It's not as high up as I would have thought. I mean, this picture is correct. Like as you're like, let's say you're standing there on the top of Mount Carmel and looking over. I would have thought it was a higher mountain, but it is a mountain.
Yeah, yeah. You've been there. You did go to it.
Yeah.
Nice. This is as close as I've been to it.
I'll find my picture and put it in the chat.
Oh, there you go. Okay, so now let's talk about, so that was the coastal plain, the Jezreel Valley. Now let's talk for a few moments about the western mountains or the hill country. And this, of course, is Jerusalem is at the center of this. And this is why whenever travel is made to Jerusalem, it says they were going to go up to Jerusalem. And because Jerusalem was, of course, is of high elevation. And so I've asked Jacob if you could read for us Joshua, if we could all turn there to Joshua chapter 17. And Jacob, could you read verses 14 through 16 of Joshua?
Joshua 17?
Yes.
Joshua 17, verses 14 through 16. And the children of Joseph spake unto Joshua, saying, Why hast thou given me but one lot and one portion to inherit, seeing that I am a great people? For as much as the Lord hath blessed me hitherto. And Joshua answered them, If thou be a great people, then get thee up to the wood country, and cut down for thyself there is in the land of the Perizzites, and of the land and of the giants, if Mount Epapharim be too narrow for thee. And the children of Joseph said, The hill is not enough for us, and all the Canaanites that dwell in the land of the valley have chariots of iron, both they who are of Bethsheban and her towns, and they who are of the valley of Jezreel.
Okay, so notice now in this passage, and actually, if you go ahead to look at page 84 in your book. Go to page 84 for a moment. So in this passage, he's talking to the tribe of Manasseh. And the tribe of Manasseh has territory from the Jordan River, and that's north of Jerusalem. This would be in what would be really northern Israel, where there was Shechem, and it goes all the way to the Mediterranean Sea. So that's a big inheritance they got. So do you see where it says Manasseh, West Manasseh on map number 39? And so you notice now, so in other words, they have an inheritance, part of their inheritance is in the hill country. So in this passage that was just read, Joshua said, because they were proud people. So Joshua's basically saying, if you're a great people, if you're as great as you think you are, go up into the woods and cut down for yourself there in the land of the giants. And in other words, so there were woods, there were hills, there were mountains. And then also he mentions the Valley of Jezreel in verse number 16, which that would be the northern part of the Manasseh's inheritance. So again, it just shows you the territory that they had and the diversity of the geography of it, from hills to valleys. Okay, so I thought that was of interest. And speaking of Shechem, so in this hill country, and if you go again, if you go back to our main area where we are, and let's see here. Yeah, so I think map number 7 is really a good map for us to look at. So if you look at the Western Mountains here, and then you see kind of in the middle of Samaria, and you see there, I have to put my glasses on actually. You see Mount Ebal. You see, find us where it says Samaria. You see where it says Samaria? And then under Samaria, it says Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim. And so these are very well-known places in the Old Testament, the days of Joshua and the days of Jesus Christ, and even before that, to the days of Abraham. So Shechem, if you see that there, Shechem in the middle of Mount Ebal and Gerizim is referenced all the way back in Genesis chapter 12 and verse 6. And so, Josh, could you please read that for us? Genesis chapter 12, verse 6.
Sure, let me just turn there. I'm sorry, I wasn't prepared.
Oh, that's okay.
Genesis 12 and verse number 6, the Bible says, and Abram passed through the land unto the place of Sichem, unto the plain of Moreh, and the Canaanite was then in the land.
Okay. Okay, so this is like one of the first places where Abraham went, and it's where the Lord appeared then in the next verse to him and promised to give him that land to his seed. And Abraham built an altar to the Lord who appeared to him there in Shechem. And so here's a little map of Shechem with Mount Gerizim on one side. And remember, during the days of Israel, the Israelites stood on both of these mountains. In Mount Gerizim, they read the blessings of the law, and Mount Ebal, they read the curses of the law. And it was also in Shechem where Jesus met the woman in John chapter 4 and came to Jacob's well. So there's so much history in these places. So Shechem, Tirzah, Samaria were 3 cities that sit on this Trans-Samaria highway in this region of Israel called the Western Mountains. That's what we're really looking at. The hill country. Shechem is a key city. And Shechem lies between Mount Ebal. So that's, we're on page 10 in our notes. And Mount Gerizim, the scenes of the blessings and the cursings, where God first promised to Abraham the land. So we just read that. You might want to jot Genesis 12, verse 6 beside that, since we read it. And then letter C, I have a mistake in the notes. So you could put Dothan in that blank. That's correct. Joseph was thrown into a pit by his brothers. But the next sentence, mark that out. I don't know where that came from. Elisha saw chariots of fire. That is not correct. Elisha did not see chariots of fire in Dothan. I don't know where I got that. I must have been sleeping when I wrote that. So that's incorrect. So Judah is a mountainous region. Oh, here's another picture of Shechem. Here's Shechem. And Mount Ebal, Mount Gerizim.
Feel free to tell me to be quiet, but Shechem Nablus now, if you're Jewish, if you're a Jewish Israeli, you cannot even go into that city without military guard. They have Joseph is buried there. Joseph's bones are buried there. They do have a woman at the well, like a chapel, well, a church over the well, and the well is still there, and you can drink water out of it. But if you're Israeli, you cannot go in.
Yeah, wow. You know, even in the days of Jesus, there was a lot of tension there, right? It was Samaria. It was the woman of Samaria whom Jesus met, and she wondered why he even was speaking to her. And there
Like
was
enemies since the day of Jacob, when his sons killed.
the Shechemites. Yeah,
That's like they've been fighting ever since.
yeah, not a very good move. Okay, so these are the Jerusalem mountains again in this hill country, these western mountains. Judah is a mountainous region. Jerusalem sits 25 to 2,800 feet above sea level. The Dead Sea, of course, has the lowest sea level on earth, as we've mentioned. So here's just some of the ruggedness of that region. Micah, did you ride through that area? Is it really mountainous as far as, or is it more like hills?
You know what? There's not so much in the area right there to see. So you kind of like you take like a main route, but it doesn't seem so mountainous, or you take a train, but there's not so much there to go see in like that area you're showing. Um, so it's not like you're up and down hills.
Okay. Okay, so now this next section is the Shphelah. And it sounds like it's Shephelah, but I did look up the pronunciation of this, and it's pronounced Shphelah. And this is a very interesting region in the Bible. It's a buffer zone between the hill country of Judah and, in a sense, and we'll see that in the Bible, Jewish kings protected and fortified cities in the Shphelah in order to protect Jerusalem from attack. In other words, cities in the Shphelah would be attacked before Jerusalem, and that happened. And we'll see that. And it also was a buffer zone from the Philistine coast cities, and we know the aggressiveness of the Philistines against the Israelites. So this was a very important area. Shphelah means lowlands. It was a strip of foothills, so it was lower in elevation than the hill country. And it had these four major valleys. And so a lot of different things happened here. So we won't look at the verses, but you know some of the people who lived in the Sorek Valley. That would be Samson. That's where Samson's exploits took place, in the Sorek Valley. Timnah, if you read Zorah, these are the places when Ekron, I think you see that. So the Valley of Sorek. Then we have the Valley of Elah. And that's, of course, where David fought Goliath, in this Valley of Elah. And here's another picture of the Valley of Elah. And here's the valley itself, and the battle location here. And this is where the Philistine camp was. And this is all referenced. Shoko is mentioned in the text of 1 Samuel chapter 17. Azekah is mentioned. And there is a tell there that is a dig where an ancient city existed in Azekah. So again, the Bible's very exact, saying that the Philistine camp was between Shoko and Azekah, and the Philistine camp was about right here, and the Israelite camp was on this side, and then the battle location was in the Valley of Elah. So again, very, very exact in its geography. And then the Ark of the Covenant also was transported between the Philistine cities. Remember when the Philistines attacked in the days of Samuel? They took the Ark, and Hophni and Phinehas, I believe, were killed. But they remember they took the Ark and they all got sick, and they moved the Ark around to these different. So here's they moved it from Gath to Ekron and Ashdod. So, again, the Bible verifies all these locations, and so that also took place on the Shphelah. Now, this is where I did ask a few people to read here, because I thought this was interesting. So later on, when King Rehoboam is the king of Jerusalem, or king of Israel, he fortified all these cities of the Shphelah. And the key city of them was the one of the key city was Lachish, which is right here with my cursor around there, Lachish. And we see Lachish as central sometimes. So look in Second Chronicles. Go to Second Chronicles chapter 11. And if you look in verse 5, and basically it has all these cities that are circled there on the map, where it says Rehoboam dwelt in Jerusalem, built cities for defense in Judah. He built Bethlehem, Etam, Tekoa, Bethzur, Shoko, Adullam, Gath, Marisha, Ziph, Adoram, and Lachish. So that's this key city here. But he built all of these cities, strengthened them, fortified them. And verse 11 says he fortified strongholds and put captains in them, store of victual and oil and wine. Now, why did he do that? To protect Jerusalem. It was like he was putting a fence around Jerusalem. This was a buffer zone. Okay, so now look what happens. And we're gonna read Micah, if you could read 2 Chronicles chapter 32 and verse 2, please.
2 Chronicles 32:2 says, And when Hezekiah saw that Sennacherib was come, and that he was purposed to fight against Jerusalem, comma.
Okay, so Sennacherib was come, and then Micah, could you go down to verse 9 and please read verse 9?
After this did Sennacherib, king of Assyria, send his servants to Jerusalem, but he himself laid siege against Lachish and all his power with him, unto Hezekiah, king of Judah, and unto all Judah that were at Jerusalem, saying, comma.
Okay, so basically Sennacherib is laying siege to Lachish. In the meantime, he's sending his servants, his messengers, kind of like his Secretary of State, to Jerusalem, saying, we're defeating Lachish. We're defeating your protector cities. And once they fall, we're going to come straight for you next. So he was warning them and putting fear into them. But first, Lachish had to fall. So look in, Maureen, could you please read Isaiah chapter 36? Look in Isaiah chapter 36 and verse 2.
Isaiah 36:2. And the king of Assyria sent Rabshakeh from Lachish to Jerusalem and to King Hezekiah with a great army. And he stood by the conduit of the upper pool in the highway of the fuller's field.
Okay, so in the verse we just read in Chronicles, they laid siege against Lachish. They defeated Lachish. And now in this verse, the king is sending Rabshakeh, his general, from Lachish to Jerusalem with an army. So in other words, they defeated Lachish. So now they're taking their next. So now they're going to come against Jerusalem and basically saying, nobody can stand against us. You better just quit, or we're going to kill you. And of course, God defended Jerusalem against this battle at that time. But so that's the battle strategy. And look at one more verse here. Venetius, could I get you to read Jeremiah chapter 34, verse 7? Jeremiah 34, verse 7.
Yes, Pastor. Jeremiah 34:7 reads, When the king of Babylon's army fought against Jerusalem and against all the cities of Judah that were left, against Lachish and against Azekah, for these defenced cities remained of the cities of Judah.
Okay, so this is Babylon. So basically, the verses we were just reading was Sennacherib, and he failed in his attempt to defeat Jerusalem. Sennacherib was the king of Assyria. They defeated and took into captivity the northern kingdom, but God delivered the Judah from Sennacherib. Remember the 185,000 of the Sennacherib's army were killed like overnight by an angel of the Lord. He defended them. But then when Babylon attacked, they did the same thing. They did the same battle strategy. They went against Lachish, took Lachish, and then after they defeated Lachish, they went against Jerusalem. So this was the Shpela. This was the buffer zone. And I'm sorry, so then if you could just get these blanks and then we'll be done. So we've been talking about it. Sennacherib of mighty Assyria took control of Lachish. I'm sorry, I should have given you these blanks. I should have showed you this. And then he sought to defeat Jerusalem, but God defeated him. So here's Lachish. So they came down here and they took Lachish. and they tried to take Jerusalem, but they failed. So that's number 7. And then number 8, this is the Babylonian attack against Jerusalem. They came down and took Azekah and Lachish, and then from there went to Jerusalem. So again, this Shephelah was this buffer region where the Israelite kings tried to build fenced and defense cities for protection. But when they became so weak, they would be defeated there, and then Jerusalem would be open to attack. Okay, and then the last thing here, then we'll be done, is the Negev. And we'll continue here from next week. And Joanna, if you could read this as we close. And the Negev, you might want to put this in parentheses in your notes beside letter E. And we're on page 11. The Negev is the south country. So look in Genesis, please. No, that's not the right one. Joanna, could I get a switch? No, I asked Esther to read this. Esther, I'm sorry, Esther. Joanna, we'll have to start there next week with you. We're not getting that far. Esther, could you read Genesis chapter 12, verse 9, and chapter 13, verse 1? And this is the south. This is the south. This is the Negev.
Okay, verse 9 says, and Abram journeyed going on still toward the south. And then 13:1 says, and Abram went up out of Egypt, he and his wife, and all that he had, and Lot with him into the south.
Okay, so the reason I read those 2 verses is because the south doesn't really mean a direction of their travel. It's a location. It's the Negev. So in the first verse of chapter 12 and verse 9, Abraham was journeying from north to south and came to the Negev. But in the next verse, in chapter 13, he went up out of Egypt, and he says he came into the south. So he was traveling north, but came into the south. See, so that doesn't make sense directionally, because he was going north, but he came to the Negev. If you look up the word south, look it up in your blue letter Bible. It's the word Negev or Negev. And so it's a region, it's not a direction when we read this, and there's many, and actually it's an interesting word study that you could look up. So this is the Negev, which is, again, and then look here, we'll be done on page 7. So we talked about the coastal plain, we talked about Jezreel Valley, we talked about the Western Mountains, and now the Negev is this south region. This is where Abraham lived. This is Beersheba. It's a very desolate region, not much rain. And so water was at a premium. This is why they would always be stealing wells. Remember, like in the days of Isaac, they would be stealing wells because that was their water supply. Water was life for them. So it was a very dry region, the Negev, the south land. Okay, so that's a little bit, and we'll continue here next week. Any questions or comments? Yes.
Pastor Matt,
Oh, yes, Joanna.
I was just gonna say, remember back when you were talking about Dothan?
Yes.
And we crossed out Elisha saw chariots of fire?
Yeah.
That did happen.
Oh, it happened, but not in Dothan.
It was in Dothan. I don't know if it's the same Dothan, but it's in 2 Kings 6. Check it out. I'll talk to you next week.
Oh, maybe you're right. It's the other chariots of fire.
Well, I'm just reading it from the Bible.
You know what? When I first saw the chariots of fire, I'm like, why did I put that? No,
You're thinking of Elijah.
I meant Elijah. Oh, it is say Elisha? You know
It
what?
is Elijah.
Don't
Elisha
cross that
saw,
out.
remember he had to have his servants' eyes opened to see the chariots of fire coming down?
Yeah, absolutely.
You were right.
So, Joanna, you opened my eyes.
Did you see a chariot of fire?
I didn't read I didn't read Elisha. I was reading Elijah. I'm like, how did I put that there about Elijah?
I'm just showing you, you're not wrong.
Right. It's not Elijah, it's Elisha in Dothan. He saw the chariots of fire surrounding the city. So I wasn't wrong. I feel better.
See?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, Charlie?
Hi, sir. I was just curious about something. I know
basically the borders that we're going over are what they go over in Joshua when they're dividing up the land right before Joshua basically is going to pass on, and then they're told to still continue taking over. But I know, like in Genesis, they have a different, like they're basically going into Iraq, or what would be a modern day Iraq. At least that was the intended.
I
As
mean,
far as Israel's that. So boundaries is that that God gave Israel, the land God gave to Israel. Yeah. Yeah. So is that like when we go to, well, millennial kingdom, I guess, whenever Christ comes back to return, they're going to take all that over then, like
I believe so, yeah.
what they never actually got to accomplish.
No, they never accomplished that in the Old Testament. And you're right, even in the division of the land, it did not extend to those boundaries that God initially. So your point is the boundaries of the days of Joshua did not extend as far as to what God gave Abraham.
Yeah, but I'm assuming
But
that's
it will
because,
during the millennium.
but it will. Okay.
I agree. Yeah, I believe so. I think so. I believe, and maybe even beyond. He's going to be King of Kings.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Wonderful. I hope you guys enjoying that. I hope it's okay. Everybody have a good night. No quiz in this class next week.